Easy guys, it's Monk here. Today we're going to look at some tips for achieving cleaner mixdowns, which is something that I think we all struggle with. I think it's kind of like an endless journey, like we're always learning and getting better at mixdowns. So this isn't like a definitive guide, you're not just going to suddenly like learn these tips and then be able to like never struggle with mixdowns again. However, these are some tips that I picked up over the years that I've found useful. What we're looking at right now is just like a little idea that I've got going on. The first thing I think you'll notice is that all my volume faders are up at 0. So this is to do with gain staging, which I have actually done a more in-depth video on. I'll leave that in the comments below if you want to go check that out. But basically what's happening here is every single channel has a gain plugin at the beginning of my effects chain. So rather than playing with the faders, I'm doing all of the volume with gain plugins on the beginnings of my chains. This is without going too much into gain staging, this means I'm running into all my plugins at a sort of more optimum level. I'm not like overheating anything, and also it gives me more flexibility at the end mixdown stage to sort of play with the faders because they're not all like at weird places. Like it gives you much more accuracy and freedom, I feel, to do the sort of nitty gritty mixdown stuff at the end. But as I said, I've done a more in-depth video on that, which is linked below. So then the first thing to think about, like EQ, is probably the most essential thing and your best friends when it comes to mixing. You have to understand that every sound in your mix has its own individual space in the frequency spectrum. So if I just take like this piano, for example, so you can see that I've actually EQ'd out some of the lows there. That's probably to make room for the mid bass, I imagine. But it might not be the best example, actually. If I look at the kick, just for now. So now I did this with it. So you can see the first thing I've done is made sure that any frequency space that isn't being used, I am carving out. Because even though maybe I can't hear it directly, I'm sure if I go down, like I can't go down further than that on this, but if you kept going down, there would be some signal coming through in this. But when it's so quiet that you can't hear it, it's no point in it being there. And you might think, oh, because you can't hear it, it's not a problem. But those things build up, and if you have that like on every channel and you've got all these frequencies that don't need to be here, they will eventually like build up to create something like that is just going to sort of clutter and busy your mix, where you want everything to have as much space as possible for the cleanest possible result. So going through and EQing out any frequencies that are unnecessary is like the first thing that I do. You'd always want your bottom, anything below sort of like, well, 20 hertz is like as low as the human can possibly hear, but really like anything below 40 hertz, like sub bass, you might want a bit, but I feel like anything below 30 to 40, it just doesn't ever need to be there. All it's going to do is like muddy up your mix and make it harder to achieve like better results. It's also going to cause problems when you're trying to achieve loudness with the mix at the end. So literally every channel, this isn't the first one I used, I've got it on there doing a cut, just to cut out the frequencies that are just going to like, you can't really hear them anyway, but they're just going to, like I say, muddy up your mix. So doing that on everything and getting rid of all frequencies that you're not using, and also understanding that every sound, like, it's not just what it sounds like on its own, it's what it sounds like in context with the other instruments. So sometimes something might sound better when it's on its own, like with these chord chops. It could sound slightly better if I had all the EQ open and I wasn't EQing any of it out, but then because I'm adding this piano line in there, they're kind of taking up the same frequency space. So you want to make sure that both these things have room to breathe and they're not like just on top of each other. So first thing I did was like take out some of the highs of the chords, because then that's going to give more of the highs in the piano room to breathe. And then another trick for this, like when you've got these two sounds or instruments that are really close to each other, is there's two ways of approaching this, and one is Track Spacer, which I've used here. Now Track Spacer is a sidechain plugin where I've then set it to sidechain to the chord chops, and sort of like sidechain compression, but it's working with EQing instead, and it's going to EQ out because it's sidechained to the chord chops. Anytime the chord chops trigger, this plugin is going to EQ out them frequencies that are problematic in the piano line. So you can see that happening here if I play it. And that's straight away going to allow my chord chops to like chop through on top of that piano more than if I didn't have it. The other way is if you have an EQ like FabFilter Pro Q3, you can sidechain this in the same way. So sidechain it to chord chops, and then the red frequencies are our sidechain signal, so we can instantly see exactly where the peaks are on both instruments. And what I can then do is the peaks in the red, I could do some like surgical EQ stuff on any bits that are particularly clashing. I won't go into that too much, but you sort of get what idea is that you can cut out bits that you want to be prominent in the piano, and cut out the bits in the chords. Cut out bits in the chords where you want the piano to come through, and cut out bits in the piano where you want the chords to come through. That's what I'm trying to say. If you don't have those plugins, because both those plugins cost a bit of money, then obviously just get up your EQs side by side is what I'd recommend, and play them at the same time, and just do it a bit more manually like that. It does take a little bit longer, but you know, it's the free option. And then another thing to do that we can like separate clashing frequencies with more is by using the stereo image as well as just like the frequency space. So consider like how left or right things are in the stereo field. So like again, these chord chops in the piano, I'd say in this example, are the most problematic thing. They're very much like on a similar frequency. So what we could do is, first thing to consider stereo image, is we could pan one, like the chord chops just a bit left, maybe like minus 10, 11, and then the piano a bit right. And now we're going to have like obviously the chord chops more in the left, piano more in the right, and that again is going to create a little bit of space. You don't want to go too heavy with that, because you want to make sure that your mixdown is always going to still work in mono. If you go too far either way, you're going to find that them things then won't sound good if someone's hearing your track in mono. So you want to use this kind of stuff sparingly, but you can get away with it a bit. Like I usually go around minus 10 maybe for something like this. So I'll just play that. I think those things are sounding much nicer together already. The other thing that I could also do is stuff like using isotope. Where's imaging? There. Using like isotope imager too, if I wanted stuff to have like more width, because maybe like you could put more width on one of them but then keep one of them more central, and again that might help to sort of separate the sounds in the sort of listener's perception of it. Another thing you can do with EQing things, this is sort of like, I hear some people saying it's good and some people saying it's bad, but like I do it sometimes, I just don't go too heavy with it. But if you like want to just clean up audio and you think maybe there's some like frequencies in there that aren't so pleasant to the ear, you can do this technique where you create like a pinch like this, and you do like an extreme like high pinch like that, and then we can sweep this across, and it's going to be much more easy to identify areas of the frequencies that aren't as nice to the ear. So if we just listen to like this piano and we go across, there you go, straight away you can hear that that bit isn't that nice. So then what you can do is create like a little dip like that, and just pinch out the frequencies that aren't as sounding as nice to you. This is one of those things where I hear like some people for and some people against it, so I guess it's one of those things that maybe try and then, you know, see if it works for you or not, see if you like it. Equally for me there, I actually like the sound of this. I think this bit sounds nice, so maybe I'll actually use that as a place to sort of boost to get more of those frequencies in that area where I'm thinking that sounds really nice. This also leads me to another point, like if you're doing EQ boosts, being sparing is usually like a better approach. Like extreme EQ boosts like this tend to not be great unless you're doing sound design stuff. Like if you're sound design, there are no rules. You're just, you know, it's the point is that you're being creative. But when you're coming down, when it's mixed down, it's far more like technical and sciencey. So it's kind of like, you know, you want to play by the rules a bit. Obviously, if it sounds good, it sounds good. That is the main rule. But like this information is a lot more useful for sort of this kind of thing, I think. But the other point I wanted to make was like if you want to do an EQ boost, what my teacher at uni told me and what I've started doing since is when I'm boosting EQ, right? So it's like creative EQ rather than corrective. Actually using like an analog emulation. So I've been using Virtual Mix Rack from Slate Digital. So like where I heard that frequency that I liked in there just then when I was playing with Pro Q, and I wanted to do it a boost, rather than boosting it just with the normal EQ plugin, using like analog emulation like this with the FGN, because when you boost frequencies with this, it's not just like, it's not the same as just putting like a little extra. It's going to do, there's certain like algorithms that's made to emulate this analog equipment where like the equipment's all its imperfections and characteristics that make it unique, they're going to be applied in this. So when you do like little boosts, there's like slight saturation things going on, and it's very technical to go into all of it. Like I don't fully understand all the time what it's doing. However, like I do think it achieves nicer results, and you do get some of that analog warmth from doing things like this. So let's try and do the boost in here. And then there's sort of like just some practical tips and tricks that I have. But then some other sort of just more general advice, I suppose, is sort of like production philosophy a little bit. Got a few tips that are sort of, you know, like slightly less like me showing you something and just things to consider. So when you're doing your final mix down, like you want to separate the creative and the mixing process basically. When you're creating, if you worry too much about the mix down, it's sort of quite a well-known thing that it's going to hinder your creative flow. Like when you're trying to get an idea down, the idea is you just want to get it down as quickly as possible. You don't want to run out of time. You don't want to run out of inspiration. You would just want to like get the idea going. So like I do always do some mixing while I'm going, but you want to try and be sparing with it and try not to get too caught up in that until you feel like you've got enough down that you're definitely going to finish the track, if that makes sense. Then once you get to that point, once your track is pretty much there and you want to start mixing it down like more technically, always put a reference track in. Find a track that you like, that you think the mix is good on, that is of a similar genre or using similar sounds, and reference it. Like, listen to yours side by side with it. Make notes of like things that you're noticing that you could use. I recommend listening through your track. Like, taking notes as well is really underrated. Like, have a notepad on your desk in your studio and listen through your track and make notes of anything that you want to fix. And then also listen through your reference track and make notes of anything that you think is good about it that you could apply to your own thing. And then also like listening to them side by side, like, you know, and picking out one element of your track at a time. And sort of like a kick drum, for example, listen to your kick drum and then listen to your reference kick drum. Does theirs sound better? If so, like, why, and how can you get yours to sound closer to what your reference track does? So that's always good practice to do. Then also the other tip is to rest your ears, to like have breaks regularly, because your ears do, like, you're always sort of on a time limit when you're producing, like, to how reliable your ears are. Like, exposure to noise over time makes them less reliable, so you do occasionally need to reset them, even if that's just like a 10-minute break away. Like, that will help a little bit. But the best practice, especially if you've just finished composing, if you've finished writing your track, don't try and mix it down right away. Like, leave it overnight at least and come back to it the next day and mix it down then, because you will achieve better results that way. You will be able to hear it from a much more critical mindset, because if you've just been sat there producing it for however many hours, you're going to be too involved, you're going to be too wrapped up in the creative process, and your ears aren't going to be on like their prime form because they will have been exposed to noise for that long. Another bit is about your plugins and stuff. It's very obviously tempting, and I'm a sucker for it as well, but like, to just download all the plugins all the time, you know, like you see a fancy new thing and you want it, and you know, plugins are fun, but like, don't undervaluate, is that the word? Don't undervalue like getting to grips and really learning the plugins you already have, like, because knowing how to use your tools will achieve better results than if you just have lots of tools that are supposedly making your life easier. Like, just get your core plugins that you really enjoy using and that you find are right for you, good for your workflow, sound good to you, and watch tutorials on them, like read the manuals for them, really get to know them and understand what they do, because you will then be able to do them, like utilize them far more effectively. And then my final point is just about compression. Compression is probably, out of all of the effects and stuff, the hardest one to get your head around. It's the hardest one to sort of hear the subtleties of, the hardest one to use in the right way. This isn't like, this is okay. This is probably the case for most producers and most people. And my tip is obviously, like, learn as much as you can about it. Try to get a grip with it as much as you can. But if you're at a point where you don't understand it, you really struggle with it, just try and remember that less is more, and that it's like having no compression on a track is going to be better for that track than over compressing it. Over compressing stuff can make stuff sound bad quicker than anything. So if you know, like, if you do struggle to hear it, or you struggle to understand it, try just using less and try and be really sparing with it. And if you've put it on something and you don't know if it's making a difference or not, you're putting it there because you feel like you're supposed to, but you can't really hear, then my advice is to either don't put it there at all, or to whatever your settings are at currently, just lower them a little bit, just back them off a bit more than what you have immediately thought is right, because less compression, and like I said, no compression, is better than over compressing a track. So that's basically all my tips for mixdowns today. Like I say, they probably won't make your mixdowns like amazing overnight. I'm still struggling with mine, I always am, but these are just some tips and tricks that I have found useful, that I've picked up over the years, that have helped me to achieve better mixdowns than what I was doing before. So hopefully you found them useful, and if you did, please drop a like and subscribe. That helps the algorithms and everything. If you have any questions about anything I said, drop them in the comments below. If you have any extra tips that I haven't mentioned here, then feel free to leave them in the comments below. That's useful for me. It's useful for anyone watching this that might also be looking to improve their mixdowns. So other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you guys in the next one.